we will continue now with the next session, talking about the advancements in machine learning and bioinformatics. And we are going to start with Ricardo, who will be, if I may say, jumping into the spot of Dr. Alex Javoronko from InSilico. And Ricardo Pacheco has a long-term experience and expertise in pharma industry. He's also an MD, and especially working now with pharma companies in terms of AI implementation and drug discovery. And he's also a part of the longevity volunteers team in the Longevity Hub for the Portuguese course and beyond. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you, Aubrey, for the invitation. I have the difficult task of stepping in the shoes of Alex, which is the founder and CEO of InSilico Medicine. Just to give you a little bit of background, as many of the speakers previously told you as well, they had a life before longevity medicine. The same case applies to me. I actually started working in the clinic first, and then after a progressive time of expedited learning, you could say that, I decided to move where I saw most innovations were coming for patients, and that was at that stage pharma, especially big pharma to begin with. So my past 10 years have been basically in big pharma, and then again another steep learning curve, but then got progressively also a little bit disappointed as to only the system focused on disease, and was trying to make a bigger and bolder move in the healthcare field, and hence got progressively educated and involved in longevity medicine and in generative AI for drug discovery, which I believe is something that is already, but will even more revolutionize the area. So before we jump in, I just would like to highlight three main events or educational activities that are going to happen quite soon. The first one is ARDD, which is happening by the end of next week, which was co-founded precisely by Alex with a couple of other individuals. And this is the 10th Aging Research meeting, which is going to happen next week, and it would be great to count with all of you there as well. The free courses on longevity medicine, I'm not going to cover this, as Evelyn already pointed out, but this is one of the resources that I found initially to get more and more educated in longevity medicine, and then started contributing also with content specifically in the different chapters initially, but also beyond that. And our latest course, which actually launched earlier this year, was about introducing longevity biotechnology and medicine for investors specifically, right? So we know that this is an area with a lot of challenges to begin with. There's a lot of challenges to actually implement and translation of basic research into actual concrete interventions, and hence we decided that this would be something meaningful. I'm also part of the co-authors of this course, together with Evelyn and with Phil, which I believe might be here as well. So regarding InSilico Medicine. So InSilico Medicine is a global clinical stage biotechnology company with an end-to-end next-generation AI and robotics discovery platform. And at the core of what InSilico Medicine does is generative AI software models that they have implemented internally, namely PandaOmics, the Chemistry 42, and InClinico, which I'm going to detail further. The company is currently headquartered in Hong Kong, but has offices in Taiwan, additional cities in China, the UAE, in Abu Dhabi, and then New York, San Francisco, and Montreal. And I myself, I'm currently helping with strategic partnership and business development activities for Europe. So for me, it's really fascinating coming from traditional big pharma world where things take quite a long time, and see a company that is 9 years in the making and revolutionizing the area not only of drug development, but also trying to take what is being put out there from a science perspective on aging research and trying to translate that into actionable targetable interventions as well. So the company was founded in 2024, so 9 years ago. Next year is going to be the 10th anniversary of the company. And initially, it was really focused on the pandaomics development. So that's the software which is basically focused on identifying the targets, the biological targets that would then be used for the development of specific interventions, namely therapeutics. And then from 2026 to 2027, the advent of Chemistry 42 and in Clinico, Chemistry 42 being the software which currently develops, uses generative AI to design small molecules that will then target the targets that were discovered using pandaomics from a biological standpoint. And then in Clinico, which is the software to basically predict clinical trial outcomes, namely from phase 2 to phase 3, where most of the attrition rate actually happens. So the majority of drugs that actually reach phase 2, they end up failing from phase 2 to phase 3 onwards. And then we are at the stage that in the last 3 years, the company has been focused on developing its own internal pipeline. Namely, the first preclinical candidate that was named was for IPF, for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a devastating disease that does not have many options out there, and that is also related with aging, and a couple of other ones that I'm going to detail further in the presentation as well. The last few years also saw an increase of the expansion of the company, not only geographically, but also in terms of partnerships with big pharma, which was a clear, it was important to validate the model. And this happened, for example, with the strategic collaboration with Fosun Pharma and with Sanofi earlier last year. So the company basically evolved from an area where they were developing algorithms to a software-based company, and that software was not only being used internally to develop its own interventions, but also being licensed to further companies, either as a strategic licensing model or a strategic partnership model, such as the ones I mentioned before, to its own pipeline, own developed pipeline of molecules internally, and hence we currently are at the stage that we can say that we have an AI biotech company already in place and very successful at it. So there's basically 2 business models the company currently has. One is focused on the AI platform per se, where you have the generative biology AI team, the generative chemistry AI team, and they are focused on everything related with the first identification of the targets and then prioritization of those targets moving forward, and then generating the right set of molecules, small molecules specifically, to those targets. And that feeds all together to the pipeline of therapeutics that I was talking about, and hence we have an in-house R&D team, mainly with expertise not only in preclinical development, but now also in clinical development, given that most of the assets that we currently have internally are at the IND enabling stage, meaning passing from preclinical stage to phase 1, first in humans. In this case, depending on the therapy area, it might be in oncology or it might be in healthy volunteers as well. And the third model, which is also being explored depending on what the activity is, but although we collaborate actively with CROs as well, there's also a couple of things that we also have internally as our own CRO efforts so that we don't need to depend on others. So many of you already know Alex, probably, but to the ones that don't know, he has really been a pioneer in an inventor in multiple deep generative chemistry and biology methods. He was the one to suggest the first applications of generative adversarial networks, discover novel targets and novel molecules, and he also is currently developing the field of AI-driven longevity medicine quite intensively. So I think we all know this graph, but I just wanted to point out that really what struck me in silico medicine was the speed of time that from target identification to validation to actually move into all the preclinical stage, the tox studies, and then IND enabling studies to first in human. This is where the AI, the generative AI capability of in silico medicine actually comes and disrupts the traditional drug R&D system. So you know that the majority of drugs take more than 10 years to be developed and more than 2 billion on average, but there's also recent papers that actually advocate that the R&D profitability and R&D productivity of big pharma has progressively reduced, and that it would be higher than 2 billion, closer to 4, 5, 6 billion even. So as much as we can accelerate this process, the more we will have something on the market with a specific time for exclusivity, which is also an important business model when you take into consideration biotech and pharma. And hence, if you can accelerate timelines and the risk at the same time, the level of risk by decelerating those timelines, then this is something of great use for everyone. So these are the current software platforms that in silico medicine has internally. On one end, Biology 42, which covers pandaomics, again, target identification, and then validation as well. Chemistry 42 for generative chemistry, and the in clinico for prediction of human phase clinical trials outcomes. So this is actually one of the examples which clearly identifies how it actually works. So, for example, in this case was the discovery of a novel CDK20 small molecule inhibitor, where we would use initially pandaomics to identify. The pandaomics gave us the target, right? Identification of CDK20. Then they used AlphaFold to predict the structure of that target, and then using Chemistry 42, they basically designed the novel small molecule inhibitor specifically for that target and ameliorated depending on what type of capabilities they wanted to have at the end stage. And then move to the predicted binding dose stage and in vitro validation of anti-proliferation activity. I already briefly talked about this, but one of the key things here was really the validation of the model that in silico medicine had in place, but also the collaboration with big pharma specifically was really key for us to have a name out there, not only in between the biotech stage, but also in the big names as well. And hence, we partnered with Fosun Pharma for QPCTL co-development and additional for therapeutic targets, for example, and with Sanofi additionally for a couple of internal developments of their own pipeline objectives as well. So is aging a disease? I think you are better suited than me to actually answer that question, but I think when it comes to pharmaceutical drug approvals, we probably should not care much. And why? Well, because if the drug works in aging, it should work in a variety of diseases, given that a lot of the aging processes actually lead to the development of many kind of different diseases as well. And hence, when we look at that from that perspective, and we see if AI can actually help additionally in this specific intricacy between aging and disease, can we actually find common targets for it? And this is one of the key things that Alex has been focused on. So I talked about the pipeline, but all the pipeline was carefully selected, not only to cover targets that would be identified to develop a specific disease, but that those targets would be involved in aging processes as well, so that it was carefully selected, and hence the longevity medicine aspect as well in place. So the concept of aging-based dual-purpose disease and the concept of the development of dual-based therapeutics is something that is currently actively being explored. Of course, we understand that we need to start at the end of the chain and then progressively move a little bit closer to upper in the chain, given that the current model of pharma and biotech and also the financing model of that specific industry is not very focused on aging research, but I think looking long-term, we have the objective of being able to change that perspective as well. So this is just an example of what we would do here. We would have age-associated diseases, data coming from age-associated diseases, data coming from non-age-associated diseases. That data set selection would then try to identify targets that are either age-associated or common, at least. And then we would benchmark those against the hallmarks of aging that are published, that you all know. And then after that additional selectivity criteria, we would additionally select potential targets that would be interested to target not only for aging-associated processes, but also for common targets, including the ones that end up developing diseases. So here, you probably already know this graph, but you can clearly see here that, for example, of the 145 targets that were mapped to the corresponding hallmark of aging, all those novel targets, one or the other that you depict here, either in blue, black, or underlined, are somewhat either age-related or common drivers of disease as well. Which, giving a classical example, for example, when you look at CAT6, it's a driver of the development of breast cancer disease, the expression of estrogen specifically, and hence we know that developing a CAT6 inhibitor would not only work in that type of cancer, but potentially in others, but also has a common pathway, aging pathway that would be also associated, and hence the commonality between one and the other altogether. This was an experiment that in silico did to identify multiple new targets for a very difficult disease to treat, ALS. As you probably have already heard, there's not so many options out there. Again, as the AI software platform in the middle of everything, basically pulling data from different sources and then trying to identify new targets, drugs to repurpose, and then validate them by in vitro and in vivo experiments altogether. So this was a very successful model, not to go into the full details, but this, just to give you an example, was led into this company, 4B Technologies, enrolling more than 30 patients in a clinical trial from discovery into patients in less than 1 year. And this is remarkable because time is everything when we look into drug development. So our current pipeline, as I said, the most developed lead currently is for IPF, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis specifically, and we developed the compound successfully until phase 1 human clinical trials, and we have just started a couple of months ago the phase 2. So as far as we know, it's probably one of the first molecules that is completely generated by AI that is currently in phase 2 clinical trials. So when you look at the diversified pipeline, again, I was mesmerized when I saw this, in the sense that, okay, if you look at big pharma, they have all the capabilities to develop all of those things, but all of these assets here that you see were assets and molecules that were developed internally using the generative AI softwares in place. None of those molecules came from the outside world, not in licensing deals, not in partnerships whatsoever, so everything developed in-house, and some of them were chosen to go fully into the clinic, and others to partner with additional companies in pharma and the biotech space as well, and others to basically have an out-licensing model where we would give the rights for other companies to develop as well. And you can see the majority of the indications is mainly with the exception of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, is mainly in oncology, and to some degree one or two in immunology. And again, that is also related with the fact of the pre-selection criteria that we have identified previously that I alluded to. So we currently have generative AI to improve the quality and the productivity of pharmaceutical research. That's the value proposition. And we currently have 14 small preclinical candidates, 9 preclinical candidates in 2022 alone, which is impressive, and 4 clinical stage programs already. So besides the IPF in phase 2, we have 2 additional in phase 1, and 3 additional ones in phase 1, and the other ones that are also in IND enabling stage, meaning if they complete the IND, then they can move into first in human. In clinical platform, I have already talked about it, but basically this is something that looks into the trial design, target choice, ADME, patient eligibility criteria, and then scores your probability of success, and from phase 2 to phase 3, where there's most attrition rate. And a recent paper that was published by Alex and colleagues identified that actually the target choice initially was one of the biggest predictors, of course, of either success or failure of specific drugs in the field. Just very briefly, I would like to also say that In Silico is currently introducing generative biologics platform. Again, so the core was coming from chemistry 42, so small molecule development. They're less complex beasts to deal with, in a sense, and generative biologics is more complex products that not only from a manufacturing perspective, but also from the level of data that you need to analyze, and hence, this is something that In Silico is going to launch also very soon. Again, where does AI help here? Biologics, peptides, and others are much more complex than small molecules, and hence the computing power that you need to actually do it is much higher, and hence why we are only launching it now, currently, after all the developments that were in place from the small molecule pipeline that I previously alluded to. Just two brief words on the AI-driven robotics. As you probably know, the robotics lab, as you probably know, this is something that is currently already in place to some degree, although there's plans for expansion as well. And as you also understand, there's a lot of things that potentially could be automated in the early drug discovery process. So what this lab is actually trying to do is basically incorporate the software models that were built internally within the company, such as Pandaomics and Chemistry 42, with all the different things that need to be done for the development of drugs, from cell culture, high-throughput screening, high-content imaging, next-generation sequencing, whatever it is, and trying to automate as much as possible what is possible to automate. So ideally, you would have an AI-driven robotic lab with the potential to accelerate early-stage drug discovery process. We already know that that stage could be accelerated by a lot of years using the AI software that we internally have in-house. But on the other hand, the timelines for the development of human clinical trials is probably something that we cannot expedite as further. We can optimize, we can use in clinical to try to predict the scores and probability of success, but this is something that it's more difficult to actually cut corners there in the human clinical development stage rather than in the preclinical stage, where, as we have shown previously as well. Regarding the vision for the future, well, you know Alex, he's a very ambitious guy, and he has a lot of plans to actually change the way we actually do drug development. I think he has been very successful already in a lot of different areas, but he wants to push the envelope even further, and hence there's a lot of efforts not only for lab expansion, where Alex wants to also support academic institutions as well, hospital centers that would want to kind of have a specific research in place that they could help them accelerate as much as possible and without fully depending on academic grants as well. So this is something that is being looked into, and also try to optimize the different capsules and how much you can actually do there as well. So with this, I would just like to end with the video that Alex put it together before we go into questions.
Suzhou in Baia Bay. We are in building 4. We've got the entire floor dedicated to our laboratory facilities. So here we're going to have a fully robotics lab. present to you the 6th generation of laboratory robotics that allows you in a fully automated mode identify targets from multiple different sample types, be it primary tissue, organoids, iPSCs, you name it.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for questions. But
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but you will be here around, right,
Yes,
at
I
the
will.
conference, so
yes.
I'm sure there will be plenty of those. And thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your presentation.